For the first time in the history of the Philippine elections, mall voting will be implemented for the May 2016 elections. The Commission on Elections said it has legal basis. Article 9 of the 1987 Constitution states that the COMELEC is empowered to determine polling precincts and their locations. But why mall voting? Is there a lack of classrooms due to the registration of 54 million voters? And to enlighten us, joining us tonight here on NewsLife is Attorney Guitierrez. He is the point person of the COMELEC and Chairman Andres Bautista for mall voting. Good evening, sir, and welcome to NewsLife.
Good evening, Cathy.
Sir, can you enlighten us about this mall voting? How many malls were chosen, and how did the COMELEC go about finally deciding to have some elections inside the malls?
Okay, well, first things first. It's not going to be the first time that we're going to use malls as voting centers.
Okay.
No? In 2013, during the barangay elections, that was around in October, they piloted about 4 malls, SM malls in, if I'm not mistaken, in General Santos City, Lipa, one in Manila, and another in Cebu.
Okay.
So one reason, and one compelling reason now, is because there is also a new law, that is Republic Act 10366, and it's on accessible polling places.
Okay.
It really wants greater and more inclusive, disability-inclusive elections. So they wanted to make these voting centers to be very accessible, particularly to persons with disabilities or PWDs and senior citizens. Okay. So that adds further ground as to why we want malls. Because when we think of malls, we actually think of all the conveniences. And as opposed to the troubles that we experience whenever we cast our votes on election day, the long queues and the very hot and humid environment, no? And as opposed to malls. But the ones that we really want to benefit from them are actually people who really need them the most. The ones who cannot manage those flight of steps. I'm actually amused every time some officials would say, no, there's no problem with accessibility in our locale because we only have single-storied buildings.
Okay.
But the reality is, before you reach that building, you have to negotiate a rough dirt road, or sometimes it's on top of a hill, or the other way around.
But the polling precincts inside the malls, is this an option? For example, I'm a voter in a specific precinct, but there's a mall option. Is it an option, or are the malls already designated as an actual precinct? Okay,
well, thank you for bringing that up. No, I want to raise to educate the watchers. There are two terms that we need to be very familiar. One is the voting center. That's equivalent of the school. Okay. And the polling place is the classroom, where you actually have the machine that counts and where you cast your vote. No. Now, your question is, can anyone just go to a mall and then cast their vote? No. And one thing that people have to know is that before May 9, 2016, you'd need to find out if your precinct is covered by that mall within the jurisdiction or territory that the group or cluster of precincts that will be voting in that mall. Not everyone can vote.
Inside
in a
the mall?
Yes.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that you can vote in a classroom and then you can still vote inside the mall.
No, you have to vote only once. No?
Yeah. But you don't have that option to choose, can I go to the mall instead of the classroom?
Well, that's one thing that they're trying to tweak right now.
Okay.
No? Because, as much as possible, there is a cost consideration. COMELEC really wants to maximize the machines that they're going to use, and also at the same time the malls. No? So the more that they can accommodate, the better. But it's something that is still being determined. Remember that the last day of elections was October 31, and if I'm not mistaken, the board of the one that reviews who will be finally considered as registered is going to happen still on November 15 or 16.
Okay. And
the
how-
ERB election registration board.
Is the COMELEC, do you already have on hand the list of malls that will serve as a
Yes.
voting center? So it's
Yes.
already done.
Yes, so they've been mapped out, but of course it will still be subjected to a hearing. They just have a list.
Okay. And how many malls are
Around
included?
160.
And this is nationwide or just in Metro Manila?
No, it's nationwide.
All right.
And the only consideration here is that they don't want any mall that is affiliated with a particular party or a candidate, for instance. No? And we know that there's a group of malls that is affiliated with Secretary Rojas, for instance. No? So that will be excluded. But the ones like Robinsons, Schumart, SM, they're in the initial list right now. But again, they will be subjected to a hearing because the Omnibus Election Code also has a criteria and a prescribed process on how this could be used if finally as voting centers for the May elections.
What is the range in terms of number of how many people can vote in a specific mall?
That's something that's still being tweaked.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers because they're still waiting for the registration figures to be determined. If I have my way, we'll maximize them.
And earlier you mentioned about the pros of having the voting inside the mall, but there are also cons, like other people are saying that there might be security issues since the mall is very open to the majority of the public. What are the measures that will be put into place to make sure that, in terms of security, that our votes as the electorate will be truly safe?
Secure, no? And safe, yeah. Well, again, that's also a matter that's still being spelled out, no? And tweaked by the Commission. There have been several groups that have already expressed their concerns because remember, some of the malls are atrium type, no? So one worry is that somebody might actually be able to zoom in and see who you're going to vote.
Okay.
But that's already being discussed so that these measures will be prevented. But if you saw the mock setup that they had I think a week ago, in one of the malls in Quezon City, they're actually more secure than what we have right now because at the moment we have this flimsy, oversized folder that we purportedly use as a cover. And then we sit down in really very low seats and everyone is just looking at you at those classroom windows that are really designed for small children and not for adults. No? So if you ask, my personal opinion is that security-wise, I think you're better off in the malls. Remember, they have their CCTVs and also, I think, security-wise, they're really doing... it's more advantageous in malls. One last disadvantage, though, is that, of course, a mall is an urban feature. And that when you go outside of Metro Manila and the urban centers, the farther you are away, then it's not necessarily the most convenient venue. And I'm afraid that unless people are properly educated, they might go to malls thinking that they can just vote anywhere. So you really have to do your work, and also COMELEC has to do its work and inform the public, even when it's approved, that these are the precincts assigned to these specific malls.
And finally, sir, between now, since the registration period has already elapsed, what should the voters prepare before the election time? What should they know? What should they find out?
I think they should check out who the candidates they will vote for are, as far as qualifications are concerned, and that now is the time to look into the programs. But definitely, once the figures and particular logistical arrangements are placed, then they will definitely be able to find out.
All right, thank you, sir. And on that note, thank you very much, Attorney Ron Guitierrez, point person of COMELEC Chairman Andres Bautista for mall voting in the May 2016 elections.
Thank you,
sir.
Cathy.